And now it gives me great pleasure to hand over to our first key speaker, James Bridge of the UK National Commission for UNESCO, Secretary General. Over to you, James, and thank you.
Thank you, Tilly. Welcome, bienvenue, and bienvenido to our global conference, Heritage for Our Sustainable Future. We've had a tremendous number of registrations, and it's really exciting to be here with you. And this is a collaboration of the UK National Commission for UNESCO with Praxis, funded by the AHRC. And I wanted to thank as well the members of the joint Praxis team, led by Professor Stuart Tabner and Helen McLagan for the National Commission for UNESCO. So as you'll know, what we're trying to do here is to help us understand the contribution of heritage towards the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or known as the Global Goals. And we really are privileged with this global audience to have so many thinkers, policymakers, and practitioners here. We've also got some superb keynote speakers. We have Lord Mendoza, Commissioner for Cultural Recovery on behalf of DCMS. We have the wonderful Ms. Bazama El Husseini, Director of Action for Hope from the Lebanon. You'll have seen the expert sessions, which I hope you've signed up for, but I know you have. And also UNESCO ADG Ernesto Atone. He has been having some connection difficulties, but we're expecting to hear from him. Now, at the end of this conference, the closing session will bring together the work done, and the subsequent report contains some useful recommendations and next steps that we can all use. And we'll have built these together, so we'll have some ownership of them, which I think is rather good. So I'll now say a little bit about the UK Commission for UNESCO. It's a constitutional part of the UK's membership for UNESCO. And a great thing in our global conference is every single one of the 193 member states of UNESCO has a national commission. In fact, there are some associate members. So it is a global family and network of 199 national commissions, all talking together, all exchanging information, and a really special way back into our own communities, for example. Now, also, there are 160 UNESCO sites in the United Kingdom, and a few of the newest ones include Jodrell Bank World Heritage Site and the Black Country Geopark. And quite often people only think of UNESCO in terms of World Heritage Sites. Well, it's so much more. Tsunami warning system, and in this case, where we have the designations in our countries, I'll give the example of the Black Country, people getting real pride back in where they come from by defining it in new ways. Now, not only is that feeding into the local economy, in the UK it's around £151 million of financial benefit a year, is contributing to the SDGs too. So even more evidence for what we're working on around heritage and the SDGs. Now, another of our designations is the UNESCO chairs, and I'm really delighted that in 3 of our successions, we've got 3 of the UK UNESCO chairs. So we have Professor Robin Conyngham, we have Professor Alison Phipps, and we have Professor Peter Stone. So it's a real privilege to have them here with you all. Now, you may know that the United Nations Scientific, Educational and Cultural Organization is continuing its 75th anniversary celebrations throughout this year after its founding in London in November 45. So it's actually using the whole year, which is quite good for us. I know our French colleagues were quite keen as well to note their proudness of it being founded in France. And what they said to me is it was conceived in London, but born in Paris. And I'm okay with that. Now, UNESCO is the only UN agency with a mandate for culture. So we're all here in the right place. And it was instrumental in ensuring that the vital role of culture in achieving sustainable development was formally recognised in the International Development Agenda. Now, turning to the SDGs in the broader UN context, in 2021, we are within the 10-year decade of action to deliver the SDGs by 2030, known as the 2030 Agenda. Now, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, reflecting on the causes and uneven impacts of the COVID-19 crisis in his most recent SDG report, emphasises how the pandemic reinforces the significance of agreements, such as the 2030 Agenda, the Paris Agreement on climate change, and we've all got the COP26 coming up in November, and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. And this again strengthens the case for internationally coordinated responses guided by the SDGs, multilaterals, and the international rules-based agenda. Now, our work at this conference will contribute to the body of evidence showing that understanding and valuing heritage is integral to achieving the aims of these agreements and to building more equal, inclusive, and sustainable economies and societies. You'll have seen some of the evidence in this in the excellent practice report, Heritage for Global Challenges, authored by Dr. Francesca Gilberto, who is in this conference and will be chairing one of the sessions a little later. And it's in part based on the superb Praxis conference, which I participated in with quite a number of people in this conference in West Bekaa, Lebanon, in February 2020. And it was such a privilege to be there. So with that, I wish you an incredibly stimulating, exciting, global, inclusive conference. There are so many people here with great ideas. We have a framework. It's the right time for us to be doing this. So with that, I hand you to Professor Stuart Taberner, Principal Investigator on Praxis and Dean for Interdisciplinary Research at the University of Leeds. Over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, James. That was a wonderful introduction, and so kind of you to kick us off in that way today. So, James, it's been an absolute pleasure to work with you and your team over the last 12 months or so to organise this conference under very difficult and, of course, completely unanticipated circumstances at the time. And I want to take the opportunity now to thank Tilly, Helen, and Matt from the wider UK NC team, and also to thank my own team at Praxis, so Francesca, Esther, and Lauren. You'll have the opportunity of meeting all of them over the next week or so, if you haven't already met them. This has been a collaboration where we've all had to learn very quickly to work across sectors, to engage researchers with practitioners, and of course, to confront the consequences of COVID over the last 12 months or so. And above all, of course, we've had to move a conference that was planned as an in-person event online. We're delighted that we've had such great interest from around the world, and we're delighted that you're all here today with us. This is an experiment, of course, and we're all getting used to doing things in a very different way. But we're hopeful that the online format might allow more people from more different places to engage one another, and perhaps in ways that are more open and democratic than before. So thank you to the UK National Commission. I hope this is the first step in a productive collaboration with you and also with the wider UNESCO family. So I'll just say a few words about Praxis and about heritage research for the SDGs by way of introduction to the conference. So what is Praxis, and why are we so keen to work with all of you to get the most out of this conference and to deliver a truly transformational impact on the SDGs? So Praxis is a large research project based at the University of Leeds in the UK and funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, also from the UK. And Praxis exists to draw together several hundred research projects funded by the HRC, but indeed all around the world to focus research on the huge challenges of our time. So climate change, poor health and adequate access to good food, conflicts and forced displacement, and many other challenges besides these. These HRC projects are ultimately part of the Global Trans Research Fund, a very large UK contribution to overseas development assistance. And what we do in Praxis is try and draw out the impact of all of these HRC projects, trying to identify where research can make a real difference on the ground and a real impact on improving lives wherever, globally, and around the world. And a really significant part of that portfolio of several hundred projects, of course, is focused on heritage, both tangible and intangible heritage. So over the last year or so, Praxis has been examining around 100 research projects that have contributed to development in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and South America, on everything from sustainable and inclusive cities to global health and well-being, to disaster response, to human rights, gender equality, and education. And the report that came out of that long analysis has just been published, written by my wonderful colleague, Dr. Francesca Gilberto, that was mentioned earlier by James. And this report provides fantastic evidence just how high quality and rigorous research is vitally important if we want to ensure that Heritage 2 can contribute to the whole range of SDGs. And I'm hoping that one of my colleagues will put the link to the report in the chat bar. Many of the projects featured in that report are representing the conference that begins today. I hope you enjoy and benefit from engaging with researchers over the next 10 days or so. It's all about maximizing impact. How can this research be translated into something that can be realized on the ground, something that makes a real difference to heritage, but also to people's lives? So this is where I'm delighted to hand over to Helen McLagan, Non-Executive Director at UK UNESCO, and also the Vice Chair of the Board of Directors there. And Helen will set out some of the main aims and ambitions of this conference, bringing together researchers and practitioners to really drill down on how we can make the biggest impact on the SDGs, working with tangible and intangible heritage all around the world. So over to you, Helen.
Many thanks, Stuart. And I'd just like to add a few comments from an unashamedly cultural heritage perspective. This event is itself an exemplar of what we're here to promote: exchanges and links between those involved in research, in policy, in practice, and in any combination of those. It's a fantastic opportunity to learn about, to learn from, and to learn with each other. And we're delighted to have participants registered from many different professional and academic backgrounds and disciplines, and from across the world and in the UK. And I would also like to add my thanks to AHRC for making this collaboration possible. At the National Commission for UNESCO, one of our objectives is to raise awareness and understanding of the role of culture in international development and in working towards sustainability. And this event is a milestone in that process. It builds on previous work, the report that we at the Commission published highlighting innovation in the cultural sphere and its contribution to international development, our 2020 report into the national value of UNESCO to UK designations, which includes a chapter on the Sustainable Development Goals, and also on the work undertaken by Praxis that's already been mentioned. And we hope that this will lead to further initiatives in this area. Culture in general, and cultural heritage more particularly, is a wide and diverse field which infiltrates so many aspects of daily life. The range of the contributions to this conference, covering the tangible and the intangible, the fixed and the movable, the physical, the virtual, the natural and the cultural, and so much more, is a vivid demonstration of this. Culture and heritage may not have high explicit visibility in the Sustainable Development Goals, but they permeate almost all of the goals in one way or another, as we shall be discussing. This has been demonstrated in the past projects already mentioned and is central to the event we're opening today. To open our event, we're very fortunate to have three outstanding speakers to kick us off and to kickstart our exchanges and our learning. And the first of these is Ernesto Otone Ramirez, Assistant Director General for Culture at UNESCO. He's extraordinarily well placed to address us today, both because of his current role at the UN body with the responsibility for leading globally on culture, and because of his past personal experience in the culture sector, including a spell as Chile's first Minister of Culture, Arts and Heritage. It's a very great privilege for me to welcome and to introduce him. Ernesto Otone, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to see you all. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I said before, it's a great pleasure to join you today for this conference that has a title that is very impressive: Heritage and Our Sustainable Future, Research, Practice, Policy and Impact. First of all, I would like to thank the UK National Commission for UNESCO and Praxis at the University of Leeds for making this conference possible. As you know, this conference is all about big global challenges and how culture is fundamental solving part of them. Unfortunately, we have no shortage of pressing global challenges today. The COVID-19 pandemic has unpinned all our lives, leaving no sector untouched, including culture. Today, more than half of countries have closed or partially closed their World Heritage properties, with devastating consequences for the communities that rely on these sites for their livelihoods. In Europe, a recent study found that the culture sector lost 31% of its revenue in 2020. That's global. more than any other sector apart from aviation. In the midst of all this, climate change remains perhaps the greatest threat to humanity's future. A new report by the International Union of Conservation of Nature found climate change to be the #1 threat facing natural World Heritage properties today. In recent years, we have seen how climate change affects cultural and natural sites and also puts living heritage. That means oral tradition, performing arts, social practices, and traditional knowledge at risk. As climate change fuels displacement, entire ways of life could be lost forever. And of course, we continue to face the pressing challenges of achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. We now have less than 10 years to build a sustainable future that leaves no one behind. We know that cultural heritage has a fundamental role to play in addressing all these challenges. The 2030 Agenda itself highlights this fact. Culture is most prominently featured in SDG 11 on sustainable cities, which calls on the international community to strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. But it is also referenced in SDG 4 on quality education, in SDG 5 on gender equality, SDG 8 on economic growth, and finally, very clearly also in SDG 16 on inclusive and peaceful society. And if we take a step back, we see that culture is implicated in every facet of sustainable development, because development is, above all, about people. It is about their needs, aspiration, and fundamental rights as human beings. If development is to be fair, inclusive, and truly sustainable, people and their cultures must be placed at its heart. We need to translate the growing global consensus around the vital role of cultural sustainable development into concrete action. This was the resounding message that came from countries during the 2019 UNESCO Forum of Ministers of Culture, which brought together Ministers of Culture from over 130 countries. This was also echoed in the online meeting of the Minister of Culture that UNESCO held in response to COVID-19 last April, as well as the recent ministerial debates of the G20 in Saudi Arabia. I firmly believe that the research community has a crucial role to play in supporting policymakers and institutions like UNESCO to translate the SDG into reality. We need to work together to build links between researchers and practitioners and to fill the knowledge gaps that remain in this field. Closing the knowledge gap when it comes to the role of cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible, for climate change mitigation and adaptation, is the goal of a new UNESCO partnership with the International Panel on Climate Change and ICOMOS. An online international expert meeting on cultural heritage and climate change will be organized later this year to strengthen scientific knowledge and collaboration on the role of cultural heritage for climate action. The meeting will also aim to develop strategic recommendations for integrating cultural heritage into the IPCC 7th Assessment Report and the Special Report on Climate Change and Cities. UNESCO is also currently working on an update of its policy document on the impacts of climate change on World Heritage properties, which will be examined by the World Heritage Committee later this year. Strengthening the links between culture and education is also a major focus of UNESCO's work on culture and development. SDG 4.7 calls on all learners to acquire an appreciation of cultural diversity and culture's contribution to sustainable development, recognizing the role of culture, and particularly living heritage, in making education more relevant for learners. UNESCO has launched a series of projects aimed at integrating intangible cultural heritage into both formal and informal education around the world. These efforts are also linked to UNESCO's wider effort to safeguarding indigenous languages, as some 40% of the world's 7,000 languages are currently endangered. This work will only gain in importance as 2022 marks the start of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. The research and expert community has also been essential to our ongoing campaigns to promote recovery in the wake of conflict and crisis through culture. I'm pleased to be joined in this morning session by Basma El Hussein, Director of Action for Hope, who we have worked with on a project to support the revival of music in the city of Mosul as part of our flagship initiative to revive the spirit of Mosul. As you know, this project is one of the largest reconstruction efforts undertaken by UNESCO in recent years and seeks to put people at the heart of the city's reconstruction through the restoration of Mosul cultural and educational institution. Following the devastating explosion in Beirut last August, UNESCO has also committed through the UNESCO Leave Beirut initiative to support the reconstruction of cultural heritage and the revival of cultural life in the iconic city. To support the collection of much needed on the role of culture for development, UNESCO has also launched and is currently piloting the Culture 2030 indicator, a set of thematic indicators that will allow countries to measure transversally the impact and contribution of culture to the implementation of 2030 agenda. My colleagues, Jyoti Hosagar, will be discussing this more in detail later in the conference. UNESCO is also publishing a monthly culture and public policy tracker, which monitors the role of culture in public policy at the national and regional level with regards to the 2030 agenda. Achieving this agenda, supporting the resilient recovery on the cultural sector in the wake of COVID-19, promoting the role of culture for climate change mitigation and adaptation, these are enormous tasks that will require new partnerships and new ways of thinking. It will require a new commitment on the part of national governments to fully integrate culture into their national development policies. It will also require an increase in the percentage of official development assistance dedicated to culture, which today is at a 10-year low. Policymakers need the support of the academic community if they are to succeed. Too often, these communities move in different spheres, which is why this conference is so important. UNESCO stands ready to do all it can to nurture these connections between heritage researchers and practice in order to build a sustainable future where heritage is safeguarded, communities can thrive, and our planet is no longer in peril. So thank you so much for this invitation and to have me for this conference. Thank you.
Gracias, Ernesto. Really wonderful to see you, and the impact you've been having on culture in Paris has been very significant, and the way that as part of the multilateral structure, the rules-based system that's so important in our world, it's really essential that you're here, and we're grateful. And a nice segue from that is, it's the meeting of the national commissions, the 199 national commissions today. And likewise, I've been speaking with them, and they're pleased and delighted you're here because I informed them of that. So now I will be moving to introduce our next superb speaker, Lord Neil Mendoza of King's Reach. He's Provost of Oriel College, Oxford. He's Commissioner of Cultural Recovery and Renewal at the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, where he was, he was also a non-executive director at DCMS. He led the Mendoza Review of Museums in England, and he's chair of the Landmark Trust. He played a very significant role in the 1.6 billion Culture Recovery Fund. And I had the real pleasure, Lord Mendoza, of hearing your speech at the Illuminated River Foundation. And it's not often that speeches stick in the mind, but it was particularly good. It was particularly apt. And with that build-up, over to you.
That really is quite a build-up. I'm not sure I can give you superb. But listen, thank you, James. Thank you for asking me to speak this afternoon on behalf of the UK government's department, and this is a bit of a mouthful for everybody, the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, which is known as DCMS. I'm in Oxford, but looking at the chat, it's fantastic to see so many people joining from all over the world to this conference, which is virtually, theoretically, located in the UK. As James said, I've got a current role as the UK government's Commissioner for Cultural Recovery and Renewal, and that role involves advising ministers and helping to ensure the protection, the recovery, and ultimately the growth again of the UK heritage and cultural sectors. So I want to thank the hosts for convening this extraordinary conference, the UK's National Commission for UNESCO, the Praxis Project at the University of Leeds, and of course AHRC for convening this discussion this afternoon around heritage, sustainability and international collaboration. And I see today's discussion as an opportunity to share experience, to learn from one another about effective ways to influence policy through research, to develop sustainable models of heritage management, and enhance our international networks of collaboration. That word keeps coming up, actually. So in the brief moment I have this afternoon, I wanted to focus on three areas. One is how research and academia can inform policy, practice, and impact. Secondly, how we can demonstrate the importance of cultural heritage for our economies and societies. And thirdly, how the UK itself is looking globally at the role of cultural heritage in achieving the UN SDGs. As James says, my day job outside of DCMS is as Provost of Oriel College at the University of Oxford. I'm a non-academic, but I understand the great potential of academic research to influence government policy. And I believe if you are going to impact that policy, you want research engaged right from the very beginning of any policy intervention. So, for example, at the moment, I am co-chairing a project with AHRC, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, called Boundless Creativity, to look directly at the impact of COVID on the culture, heritage and creative sectors in the UK. And it's a joint project between AHRC and DCMS, so government and academia, that's going to collect data and experience from practitioners in the cultural and creative sectors. And we hope it will really help inform us as we move forward out of this health crisis. And an important aspect of the project has simply been bringing people together, a theme that's already been mentioned by speakers today. So we have academics, leaders in the field of heritage and culture, and government policy officials together to learn from one another. And in culture, we haven't just included people from, for example, the heritage sector, but we've also had leaders from broadcasting, from computer gaming, from performing arts and museums. And at a political and policy level, we need to embrace the challenges that we are now hearing about as academics so that we can find practical solutions to long-term issues. We have learned how some sectors, like broadcasting and gaming, have benefited hugely from this crisis. And others, of course, struggle with new methods of distribution, with discovering new audiences that range from the very local to the global. And the ways that practical help and aid can be offered to communities, for example, on mental health. So we're learning so much, and we hope that we will be able to propose new direct research. But I do feel that one of the defining and positive impacts of this awful experience of the pandemic, at the government end at least, is our enhanced ability to collaborate thanks to digital tools like the ones we're using today, where we can speak to hundreds of people around the world simultaneously and share information equitably. Professor Stuart Taberner discussed the work of the Praxis Project, which is an exemplar of collaboration to address global challenges. And the Praxis Project is working with DCMS and government to provide evidence of what works, to inform robust policy in addressing cultural heritage protection internationally. Because as organizations, we all bring different perspectives, networks, and values to the agenda. So combining that expertise allows us to work together and identify solutions, new opportunities, as well as new challenges. Now, my second point concerns the value and relevance of cultural heritage in building a sustainable future. At this conference, we all understand the importance of cultural heritage. We all know about its contribution to the economy, to society, to communities, and of course that it enables us to lead rich and fulfilled lives. However, too often, I feel that cultural heritage can find itself sidelined against seemingly competing interests, often economic, social, security, or political demands. And it's therefore key that we demonstrate that cultural heritage is not in competition with these areas, but can enhance and help. We need to showcase both cultural heritage's tangible impacts and how those impacts can be measured in economic terms. Now, a local demonstration in the UK is the one that James mentioned at the beginning, which is the unprecedented response for culture as a result of the pandemic, which was the formation of the Culture Recovery Fund, which we have here. The fund of £1.6 billion is the largest sector package for any sector, actually, across the UK economy, designed to help protect heritage and cultural places. As was mentioned before, the cultural and heritage sector is probably the hardest hit sector, maybe matched in the UK by the hospitality sector, which has suffered severely. But to get to that fund, to get such a giant fund so quickly, was an extraordinary example of collaboration across government, across cultural agencies, sector representatives, working groups, scientists, trade unions. And we were able to secure the fund really quickly and start distributing money equally quickly. And for me, it's evidence of the great importance. It's a great chink of hope that this particular UK government places huge importance on the value of culture and heritage in our national life. And the fund is working well. The mechanics are run by what we call arm's length bodies, the Arts Council, the Lottery, the Lottery Heritage Fund and Historic England. And to date, we've distributed over £1 billion, and it's still rushing to distribute a few more 100 million by the end of March. And heritage is at the heart of that. We've distributed almost 150 million to 1,000 different heritage sites and locations. And again, we entrust those arm's length bodies to allocate and distribute the funding across the UK. And of course, we have additional oversight, due diligence and governance through a sort of an umbrella cultural recovery board. And a key criteria of the fund, actually, was that grantees needed to demonstrate that their projects were community focused and that they were sustainable. And we've covered so much of the nation's diverse heritage, including archaeological sites, churches, historic houses, bridges, piers, museum collections, and heritage landscapes. From Hadrian's Wall in the top of on the English-Scottish border down to Cresswell, the incredible Cresswell Crag ice caves near Sheffield, or helping individual archaeological organisations weather the storm that's going on at the moment. In fact, just on Friday, just before the weekend, DCMS announced a further 13.5 million as part of 120 million of capital funding delivered by those same arm's length bodies to the Black Country Living Museum, to Lincoln Cathedral, to the oldest surviving synagogue in the UK, Bevis Marks in London, to a heritage railway, the North York Moors Railway. And we're still in progress, as I mentioned. Now, one of the new programs that I'm proudest of at the moment at DCMS is a quiet initiative I'm chairing called Culture Heritage Capital. And it's seeking to build on some of the excellent work that's been done in the environmental world on natural capital. And what that is seeking to do is use evidence and academic research to produce guidance for how we can value the outputs of our cultural and heritage organisations. Now, we all do this. We all have to value it. But what we're trying to do is standardise it in a way that the British Treasury can understand exactly the value that heritage organisations can produce in, for example, well-being or education or community identity. And if we can do that, it will really help government understand how to fund this sector in the future. And I think it could be a globally helpful initiative, which I hope we will share with all. And we've got lots of policymakers on the board and also individuals from Historic England, the National Museums Directors Council, and academics from universities like Exeter University or UCL and LSE. And I know that later in this conference, my colleague Harman Sagar, who's the chief economist at DCMS, will be discussing this in detail on a panel, and that'll be well worth watching because he's fabulous. And then finally, in terms of what our department is undertaking internationally, I am obviously very proud of what we've done in the UK to help with culture during this period. But we're also working to safeguard cultural heritage internationally. And as many of you will know, through our Cultural Protection Fund, the UK government has spent over £40 million of official development assistance money on heritage protection in crisis-affected countries around the world. The fund was delivered by another arm's length body, the British Council, this year in partnership with AHRC. And I hope that it's been perhaps an example or a global blueprint for showing how locally led initiatives can create sustainable opportunities for economic and social development, like restoring conflict-damaged cultural sites in Yemen. And the dual keys to that fund's success have been political commitment at the highest level and a really good relationship with arm's length bodies like the British Council. Because to have any sustainable heritage project, it needs to be community-centred, and we need to trust local experts in the field, while of course ensuring accountability and proper due diligence in relation to taxpayers' money. And as this particular Cultural Protection Fund comes to a close, we're launching a new program, if you like, called the International Cultural, it's a bit of a mouthful this, I may get it wrong, the International Cultural Heritage Protection Programme, which takes the experiences and impacts of the previous fund and coupling this with our policy expertise to address new critical issues like climate change, digital innovation, and global cooperation. So I have a sort of, I'm feeling that the UK has a phenomenal year ahead because we want to demonstrate good leadership in global institutions. The UK is chairing the G7 in Cornwall in June, and it will be, as you all know, co-chairing COP26 in Glasgow in the autumn. And the UK is and wants to be at the heart of these discussions, and it's a real opportunity to develop our international collaborations. And as we emerge from this pandemic, we are all looking at new ways to bring our world together. And I really sincerely believe that heritage and culture, policy and action can help both in the UK and, of course, around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lord Mendoza. That was absolutely wonderful introduction to the conference and really kicked us off in the best way possible, I think. I'd like to move now to our third speaker, Basma El Husseini. And Basma is a cultural manager, an activist for social change, and a UNESCO expert in cultural governance. For the past 30 years, she's been involved in supporting independent cultural projects and organizations around the Arab region, particularly involved in, more recently, Action for Hope, which is evidence of her commitment to culture and artistic creation as resources that really enable people to attain social justice and freedom and to endorse positive social change. So Basma is here today with a short video, but I'm hoping this will also be available for questions and answers after that. So Basma, if we can hand over to your video, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, when I received the invitation to give this speech, I accepted it immediately. The reason for my acceptance is that I'm not a cultural heritage specialist. I run an organization that works to integrate arts and culture in the lives of marginalized and displaced communities. I was excited about this conference because I believe that our experience as outsiders to this field could be useful and relevant. I learned in my work that the modern tendency to specialize has led us to partial blindness to the whole picture. I believe there is an increasing need for outsiders like me to probe and interfere, and for people who are specialists in cultural heritage to also look into other fields, especially those related to social and economic development, the environment, and even politics. The truth is, we in Action for Hope unintentionally found ourselves working in cultural heritage. We started to work in 2013 with Syrian refugee communities in Lebanon and Jordan. And at that time, hundreds of thousands of refugees were living in refugee camps and other informal settlements across the two countries. Most of them were from rural areas who had left their destroyed villages and walked for weeks to reach safety. They were poor, traumatized, isolated from their surroundings, and they were unable to speak about what happened and not very interested in communicating with strangers like us. One thing we discovered they can talk about is their distant past, tales, cooking recipes, and songs. It was easy to notice the value of intangible cultural heritage in restoring and asserting their sense of who they are. Of course, tangible cultural heritage is very important too for the whole of humanity and for the well-being of future generations. But we have to remember that around 1 billion people live in slums, refugee camps, and small forsaken villages and cannot go to museums or access archives, and that many of these people had to leave behind the archaeological landmarks they and their ancestors lived by. Cultural heritage is as important to them as it is for the more fortunate classes in society. Perhaps even more so, as they needed to assert their common identity and their sense of belonging to one another. Over the years of our work, our music schools in Lebanon and Jordan, supported by the British Council Cultural Protection Fund and the Aga Khan Music Program, provided basic and advanced regular education in traditional music to more than 170 young people, with around 40 of them now working professionally as musicians and music teachers. On the 12th of March, we will be launching our most recent production, the Syrian Music Map, an interactive website that features Syria's diverse musical traditions. In 2019, we started to work in the city of Mosul in Iraq, 2 years after ISIS had been defeated and the city was liberated. The city still suffers from vast destruction, lack of many public services, and a general atmosphere of despair and fear. Within UNESCO's initiative, Revival of the Spirit of Mosul, we started a project called Listening to Iraq. The project seeks to revive the diverse musical traditions of the Nineveh region as a means for restoring social cohesion and endorsing a vibrant cultural identity after many years of violent conflict. The project is ongoing, and we have recently organized 2 public concerts in the destroyed city. In all these experiences in the 3 countries, we noticed that conservative communities that do not usually welcome artistic activities such as theater or film would easily open up to traditional songs and music. We witnessed what reviving musical traditions means for individuals and communities. For talented individuals, these traditions give them additional creative resources that they need to be able to create new music, as well as build audiences within their communities and beyond. For marginalized and displaced communities, the musical traditions are an endless source of enjoyment and pride. That moment when the village or camp residents join the music group in singing a tune they have known for generations is a magical one. It means that they are alive and that they will survive. The current COVID-19 crisis has shed light on the importance of culture and artistic activities during such difficult times and their utility in moral and psychological healing, but at the same time has negatively impacted cultural life and artistic practitioners. An often overlooked impact is that the professional carriers of intangible cultural heritage, the folk performers, the musicians, and the craftsmen masters are now among the most vulnerable in many societies, since most of them are freelancers or informal workers, and almost all social protection plans that were introduced in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis did not include them. is all this connected with the famous Sustainable Development Goals? I would not worry too much about looking for SDG indicators that we can prove we are contributing to. Because if we, and I mean all of us, are working to improve the world, then I'm sure that these connections exist. We have to remind ourselves that the SDG framework is a modality, a toolkit that would help us get to where we always wanted to get. A better life for all and less discrimination and injustice everywhere. The value of cultural heritage existed before the SDGs and will certainly outlive 2030. However, one must admit that the discourses around the SDGs are dominated by economists and politicians, and that people working in culture, including cultural heritage, seldom get the chance to engage in decision-making processes around the SDGs. Although political scientists often recognize the connection between cultural identities and politics, this is hardly reflected in major political decisions. We often find that arts and culture is totally forgotten when governments account for efforts to achieve the SDGs. And that the mention of cultural heritage is usually reduced to the restoration of monuments and its direct connection to tourism as an economic activity. This is a real challenge. Not just for us as cultural professionals and academics, but for the whole of our societies. The importance of cultural heritage and artistic expression to the well-being of individuals and societies cannot be overestimated. Overlooking the power of art and undermining the value of cultural heritage in political and economic decisions has led to more marginalization, isolation, and eventually extremism. Finally, I think that this conference provides a unique opportunity to join forces among diverse institutions and individuals to offer some practical recommendations towards manifesting how devoting attention and resources to the research, preservation, learning, and practice of cultural heritage would improve our lives and reduce injustice and discrimination. In doing so, I hope that you, my friends, will not only do what the politicians and economists want you to do, i.e. to present quantitative and empirical evidence, but also to keep trying to get them to understand and appreciate what is deeper and more impactful than quantitative and empirical evidence: the power of emotions, memories, and dreams. Thank you.
Thank you, Basma. That was absolutely wonderful. And thank you to all three of our speakers for really solid and inspiring introductions to the conference today. We have just a couple of minutes for maybe just one question, which I've cleverly put together from the very many questions that have appeared in the chat bar. So just an amalgam question, if you like, and then we'll move straight into our round table. So this is really a question to all three of our speakers, and it is, I'm just looking at my notes here, how can we harness the digital developments that have happened during the pandemic to really boost the impact of cultural heritage and the connectivities related to it as we go forward to build new audiences and new types of engagement? So it's really about digital and how we can use digital in the future to boost cultural heritage as an impact on the SDGs. If I go first to Lord Mendoza and then perhaps to our other two speakers.
Well, this is one of the areas that we're trying to, as you know, Stuart, look at in Boundless Creativity, and we are learning an enormous amount from organisations, from other types of organisations like the broadcasters, who are not only doing incredibly well during this period because we're all stuck inside watching their content, but what they're able to do is discover new kinds of audiences. And those audiences might be global and they might be thematic. They might be people who are interested in painting portraits or cooking. And in the case of heritage, it could be people who are interested in that. So I think there are brilliant new ways that we can learn from broadcasters, from gaming companies, to find our way. And I hope that when we finish our research project, we will come up with a number of recommendations of areas for research that organisations can look at. You know, but we've seen, for example, in performing arts, have done very well at learning how to put on productions inside without an audience and yet sell tickets for around the world for people to enjoy that. And I don't see why that shouldn't equally apply to heritage.
Okay. So that's a tricky question, because when you see the statistic, you have only 48% of the world who has access to new technologies. So we have half of the world that is not yet there. So what we are constructing is for the 50% of the North, to say it somehow. So that's important. When we look at the data that we collected on museums, only 5% of museums in Africa had digital content during the pandemic. So we are not right there yet for the global situation. But we have to continue to work. It's two different railways, and we have to work with both of them. What is important is that also 2020 has been the year where the CISAC, that's International Droit d'auteur, has been the lowest in the last 20 years. So yes, we are using technologies, but the fair remuneration should also be part of the discussion. And for creators, it's very hard. Imagine for practitioner of intangible, how you collect money for this. So it's not so easy. We should reflect on these matters and use new technology, but please, we have to discuss also ethical subjects around the use of technology.
Thank you, Ernesto. I think that actually moves us very nicely to comments that Basma may have around use of digital technologies on the ground.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Yes, I think UNESCO in particular as an organization is very well positioned to use its so many arms and conventions to try and perhaps bring down some of the barriers that stand between accessing the digital means and the internet for culture and cultural heritage work from all over the world. I think the reality is in our part of the world, internet access is a problem. Internet cost is even a much bigger problem, but it doesn't stop at that, because also there is the know-how, the technology, the skills, the software, and the banking restrictions, because we might encourage people to use the internet to sell products, but how can they get paid if the banks do not allow the transactions, et cetera, et cetera. So there are political, there are financial, there are digital, technical, there are all kinds of barriers. And somehow I think UNESCO can find a way to cross-cut into many of these challenges through its many kind of departments and offices.
Thank you very much. Apologies to everyone whose question wasn't answered in the last bit of Q&A. We do need to move on to our round table. But before I do that, can I please thank all three of our speakers for an absolutely fantastic introduction to the conference. You've set out the themes and the topics next Tuesdays with great elegance and aplomb. It's been a really wonderful start to a week and a half of really fruitful discussions, I hope. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll hand off to Francesca Giliberto to lead us into the roundtable discussion. Francesca.
Thank you, Stuart. And good day, everybody. As many of you already know, I'm Francesca Giliberto, and since January 2020, I've been working as postdoctoral research fellow on heritage for global challenges at Praxis University of Leeds. Here, my research on this topic started with the organization of the conference in West Bekaa, Lebanon, previously mentioned by James, which was organized just before the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it seems really a lifetime ago. And in that occasion, we brought together more than 50 researchers, policymakers, and funders to discuss the topic of heritage for global challenges from different perspectives. The outcome of this conference provided useful insight for the report on heritage for global challenges, already mentioned several times today, and which I authored, and I'm very happy to be able to share it with you today. And this report presents a quantitative and qualitative analysis of 87 research projects funded by the UK's Global Challenges Research Fund and Newton Fund, and which were developed in 50 countries eligible of official development assistance. The report highlights the relevance of heritage research for tackling global challenges and supporting the achievement of all the SDGs. It shows how the multifaceted nature of heritage, tangible and intangible, cultural and natural, can be effectively mobilized by research projects to foster innovative, interdisciplinary, inclusive, and long-term developmental approaches. Through more than 30 case studies, this report provides concrete evidence for what works, but also it illustrates the lesson learned from common challenges encountered by different research projects and provides a series of recommendations and future research areas with the aim of maximizing the potential of heritage research for international development and operationalizing the SDGs on the ground. However, today and with this conference, we would like to make a further step forward by bringing together a diverse range of cultural heritage and sustainable development contributors, including not only researchers, but also practitioners, policymakers, non-governmental organizations, museums, private sector representatives, and other stakeholders from across the globe, to explore how best to utilize cultural heritage to drive forward the SDGs on the ground. I would like to thank once again our keynote speakers for their fascinating and inspiring presentations. And I would like to invite our other 4 brilliant panelists, key players in the field of cultural heritage for sustainable development and the SDGs, to join me to continue this discussion through a virtual roundtable and bringing their unique perspective and experience and highlighting successful achievements and future opportunities for heritage research, policy, and practice for sustainable development. So let me introduce our first panelist, Jan Thomas, who is Head of Evidence at the British Council, leading on the learning, evaluation and research across several British Council programs, such as the Cultural Protection Fund, the Programme on Inclusive Growth, on festivals and seasons, and the Developing Arts Evidence Strategies and Evidence Framework. He has also recently co-edited the publication entitled The Missing Pillar, Culture's Contribution to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. He is the chair of the Merseyside Music Education Alliance and has sat on several arts organizations' boards. So welcome, Jan. And our second panelist is Henry McGee, a bird ecologist, museum curator, and senior manager. And he is the founder of Curating Tomorrow, a consultancy to help museums and their partners to enhance their contributions to sustainable development, the SDGs, climate action, and biodiversity conservation. He is the author of Museums and the SDGs and is member of the ICOM Sustainability Working Group and the UCN Commission of Education and Communication. So welcome, Henry. Then our third panelist is Jordi Pasqual, coordinator of the United Cities and Local Governments Cultural Committee, and whose work is based on Culture 21 Actions, the most complete toolkit on culture in sustainable cities. Jordi was also involved in the global campaign #Culture2030Go, that advocates for the role of cultural factors and actors in the UN Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. He has also published books, articles, and reports on cultural rights, international cultural relations, culture and sustainability, and the governance of culture. Welcome, Jordi. And finally, last but not least, I present you Gabriel Caballero, who is the ICOMOS focal point for the SDGs, and act as facilitator and coordinators for ICOMOS work in relation to the Global Sustainable Development Policy arena. He coordinates the activities of the SDGs Working Group, which I'm also happy to be part of and to actively contribute into it. And he develops ideas and monitor progress to support the implementation of the ICOMOS Action Plan for Cultural Heritage and Localizing the SDGs. Gabriel is also an expert member of the International Scientific Committee on Cultural Landscapes, and specializes on sensitive landscape design interventions, cultural landscape research, culture-nature interlinkages, and world heritage evaluation in rapidly urbanizing areas in Asia. So welcome, Gabriel. And I think I've talked enough, so I'm happy to give you the floor and to start this conversation with our questions for you. So considering your and your institution's relevant work on cultural heritage for sustainable development. I would like to ask you, what do you think have been the most successful achievements so far in the sector of culture and heritage as contributors to sustainable development? So, Jan, we'll start with you, as this is the list we have in our program. The floor is yours.
I would just like to give three kind of snapshots from kind of three initiatives or projects that the British Council's been undertaking over the past couple of years. So the British Council is the UK's cultural relations organisation that works across 110 different countries globally. And I'd just like to first talk about our Cultural Protection Fund, which Lord Mendoza kind of mentioned earlier in partnership with DCMS. So we're taking a cultural relations approach, kind of a mutual approach, and based on kind of local in-country needs. The fund aims to create sustainable opportunities for economic and social development through building capacity to foster, safeguard and promote cultural heritage in intangible and tangible heritage. So, for example, a recent round of funding from the Cultural Protection Fund explored preparedness measures to protect cultural heritage against the effect of natural disasters and climate change. We've also undertaken work mapping the Cultural Protection Fund project to relevant SDGs, and we're currently undertaking a piece of research at the moment looking at kind of cultural heritage and climate change adaptation and practice. So that's one example, just a very brief snapshot. The second program we have in this space is our Cultural Heritage for Inclusive Growth program, which is funded through official development assistance funding. So these we have projects in Colombia, Kenya and Vietnam. And this is an action research program that explores cultural heritage for inclusive growth as a global concept with local solutions. The projects are community and people-led and are devised and managed with local partners on the ground, supporting local communities to promote their own cultural heritage, leading over time to inclusive economic growth. But central to this approach is a people-centered ethos, providing an enabling environment for inclusive growth based on understanding of local context and appreciation of cultural diversity. And then a third example, and you kind of highlighted this in your introduction, is the work we did at the end of last year, producing a report called The Missing Pillar. And this report that we published, and it's available on our website, explores the place of culture in the SDGs through research, policy and practice. So it analyses where arts and culture as a sector and as a creative process can fit with a number of goals, including targets and indicators across the SDGs. And we looked at a number of British Council and non-British Council programmes around the world, tackling various issues and across a wide range of sectors such as sustainable fashion, creative inclusion and heritage protection. So the report made a series of recommendations to the British Council, but also to the sector more broadly, about how the SDGs are more accessible to the cultural and heritage sector, but how them to be embedded in the delivery of heritage and cultural initiatives based on local needs, and for the impact and kind of research and evaluation around the SDGs, heritage and culture as well, making recommendations around that. So it was very much a first step in framing kind of our British Council impact, but more broadly the sector's impact around the SDGs. And as I say, I think that report's in the reading pack for this conference. So they were just a very three snapshots from a variety of our portfolio.
Thank you very much, Jan, for your wonderful introduction about the British Council work. And now I give the words to Harry.
Okay, thank you, Francesca. And I think the thing I would start to say is that we have to acknowledge that culture and heritage from the world before COVID are also an expression of that world for good and bad. And so if we are looking for a more sustainable future, that may also require us to rethink how we think about culture and heritage. And so, heritage and sustainable development are so closely linked, and I'll talk about three things very, very briefly. That if we think firstly, way back to the late 1980s, when people were first really getting worried about climate change, it was actually the concept of climate as a shared global heritage, common heritage, that helped to set the direction for the Rio Conventions and the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is now nearly 30 years old. And what we can say is that with many of the other international conventions and treaties that there are, they pretty much all talk about the importance of education and involving people, but that there's no other way to say it. That just has not happened. And so one of the great things with the SDGs is that they already have all of these big agendas rolled into them. Human rights, the Convention for Biodiversity, the Framework Convention for Climate Change, the Paris Agreement, the Human Rights Conventions. So they're a kind of very, very effective shortcut into many of the big challenges that we face in our world today. And I think the second thing I would say there is linked to that, is around the coherence that we start to see between sectors, across sectors, vertically, horizontally, transversally, where more and more people are talking about the SDGs. What do they mean in their work, and how can we work? And it has to be kind of get beyond, do we contribute to them? How can we contribute to them? But it's how can we contribute better? Because sustainable development helps us get away from that kind of often slightly unhelpful discussion about, well, what is sustainability? Sustainable development is about action. It's about action that brings together people and planet and prosperity together. And I think the third thing I would just say very, very briefly is to mention some of the great projects that we see that are really trying to get to grips with this. So we see ICCROM has a great project at the moment called Our Collections Matter, which is looking to gather together lots of tools that collections-based institutions can use to enhance their contributions to sustainable development. And just to kind of close the circle, seeing as I started talking about climate change, is I'm involved in a project called Reimagining Museums for Climate Action, which we've been running over the last year. And that'll lead to an exhibition at Glasgow Science Centre ahead of and during COP26. And so I think that's what I would like to say is just we need to just try to bring these sectors and silos together, and the SDGs are absolutely brilliant for that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry. And I cannot agree with you more about the needs of more interdisciplinary and integrated approaches, in particular also relating the culture and nature sphere. And I know that some other speakers will talk about this later on in this discussion. So now I would like to invite Jordi.
Thank you very much, Francesca. Congratulations for convening this conference, University of Leeds and the UNESCO UK committee. It is a wonderful conference. Imagine that somebody goes to women and to the whole feminist movement and say, look, we are going to delete SDG 5, and you will have to struggle with other actors so that your agenda progresses within the SDGs. You will agree with me that this is a very unpleasant, not suitable situation. Fortunately, women take full responsibility in the delivery of SDG 5. Education actors take full responsibility in the delivery of SDG 4. Climate activists take full responsibility in the delivery of SDG 13, 14, and 15, and other. These constituencies, these actors have a goal or several, and they also have the duty to monitor all the implementation of the other goals. They are active, analyzing the implementation of all the SDGs. For me, it is also unpleasant and not suitable that the cultural dimension of development is not given full recognition with a standalone goal, with the main cultural issues, challenges explicitly recognized as full contributors to the achievement of the goals. What do we have? In fact, we have nice words in the preamble, target 11.4. Yes, some considerations related to culture in other targets. Some are visible, 4.7, 8.9, 8.3. Some not visible, but existing, yes. 5.1, 10.2, 10.3, 12.8, 16.10, 17.17, and a potential use of culture in many other targets, yes. But is this enough? Okay, there is progress compared to the Millennium Development Goals, but it is not enough. I believe that the cultural actors would like to have a goal and then have the capacity to take responsibility for that goal and also to influence the other goals. And with this, I mean clear responsibilities in the delivery of policies, programs, and projects based on the right to participate in cultural life or in cultural rights in general. Our institutions named libraries, heritage sites, musea, music, dance. This is part of life. If sustainable development is based on life, these institutions should be in the Charter for the Achievement of Sustainable Development, and involving all citizens and inhabitants in processes related to heritage, diversity, creativity, and knowledge. If we need to leave no one behind and no place behind, this is the agenda of cultural actors. Let me recall that in 2013, the Culture Goal campaign wrote a document and published a document, ensure cultural sustainability for the well-being of all. And this campaign also launched several documents in 2014-15. And the last one, the day before the SDGs were approved. Our document said, culture in the SDG, yes, progress made, but important steps remain ahead. The campaign includes the International Federation of Libraries, ICOMOS, the International Music Council, the International Federation of Coalitions for Cultural Diversity, us, the UCLG Culture Committee, Arterial Network, Culture Action Europe. We published an interesting report in 2019, September 2019, wrote mainly by Ege Yildirim, who is in the conversation. A report that analyzed the voluntary national reviews sent by national governments yearly to the high-level political forum. And what we discovered, yes, that the report, our report, makes evident that the national governments are not enough, including the role of culture in the delivery of their national plans to achieve the SDGs. Very soon, in 2-3 weeks, our campaign will release another document for the decade we have ahead of us, 2021, 2030. And we hope to deliver another report on the cultural content of the voluntary national reviews 2020 and 2021 later this year. I didn't answer your question, Francesca, but I think that this frame we should not forget. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you, Jordi, for this wonderful overview about the evolution of how the international discourse on heritage for sustainable development was able to include at least some references to culture and heritage in the current international development agenda, the Agenda 2030, but how also there are some missing gaps and there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. And thank you very much also for all your work, or your advocacy work made through the Culture 2030 campaign. So actually now I will give you the word to Gabriel, but my second question will be around what are the missing gaps and what can we do next in order to move forward. So this opened very, very nicely the floor to the next question. But before, I would like to hear Gabriel's views on this before going on with another round.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesca. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me and from Praxis and the UK National Commission for organizing this event. I think it's quite important what Jordi has said, and we should discuss that a little bit more. And as you all know, heritage is now part of the highest levels of policy for sustainable development, right? We have integrated Target 11.4, and that is an achievement in itself for heritage. World Heritage has a World Heritage and Sustainable Development Policy, which ICOMOS contributes to, and also with other actors. And that also prioritizes actions in Africa. Now, we do have collaborations with colleagues like UCLG for the Culture 2030 goal campaign. And as I support Jordi in what he's saying, that really cultural life is quite important. We need to have a bigger kind of perspective, not just on the heritage field, but beyond what our own niches. We have to look at the bigger aspects of life. Now, practitioners of ICOMOS are looking at different factors of the SDGs or the targets. ICOMOS is looking into climate change. We have a climate change and heritage working group, and ICOMOS is the secretariat of the Climate Heritage Network that looks at particularly SDG 13. Last year, ICOMOS has done a resolution called Climate Emergency in Heritage, which will activate a lot more conversations on the thinking behind heritage and what is its role to to climate change action. Now, we have also done other thinking for rights-based approaches. So we have a working group in ICOMOS called the Rights-Based Approach Working Group, which is promoting good practices approaches in World Heritage Management with a vision of human rights. We also have international scientific committees that looks at particular parts of the SDGs, the energy and sustainability, economics of conservation, and we also look at the nature-culture linkages. So there are several different aspects that ICOMOS looks at, but we need to do more. We need to collaborate further. We need to look at go beyond the silos that we have created for ourselves and look at the transversal issues that we have that goes beyond heritage. How does heritage become part of the daily life of people? And I think that's something that we can discuss on the next round. Last one for ICOMOS, we are in an exciting time as we start the decade of action. We are creating a policy guidance for sustainable development, which Francesca is one of our lead authors, including Sofia Labadi, Ege Yildirim, Ilaria Rossetti, and Linda Shatabi. Many of the people that you will see in the next couple of days are part of this discussion, so do listen to them as well. We are providing this policy guidance document we are launching it in March, and it is hopefully creating that kind of conversation beyond policy and looking at how we look at case studies and how heritage really relates with the SDGs on the ground. And we are reaching out to a lot of our national committees and international scientific committees to really think about their own context and how heritage becomes a driver of the SDGs. So it needs to go deeper. It needs to go to many of the people that are looking at the different perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabe, also for mentioning the ICOMOS policy guidance on heritage for sustainable development we have been working on, and for introducing all ICOMOS activities in this field. So now I think we can move on, continuing the discussion so now we have framed the current panorama on cultural heritage for sustainable development, but what are the missing gaps and what should we do next in order to move forward, and how can this conference really contribute to make a further step forward in heritage research, practice and policy, considering all these sectors at the same time? So I don't know, shall we continue with the same order, or do you prefer to open the conversations more freely?
So yes, just two practical things. So the very multifaceted nature of heritage, tangible, intangible, cultural, natural, is both kind of a challenge and an opportunity. So to kind of two things that this conference might be able to kind of take forward and kind of turn into practice, so to speak. Unpicking, understanding the SDGs on the ground in practice, in delivery. So the SDGs as a tool, but cultural heritage organisations, practitioners do not always use the language of sustainable development, even though the work is clearly relevant to it, it aligns to it. So there's a translation that perhaps we could have a look at. And then second, what we've been looking at is kind of this what works approach to our work. So how we've all got evidence, we've all got evaluations, we've all got learning and research, but it's very siloed. And so what we're trying to have a look at is how we can unsilo the evidence base, unsilo the kind of the learning, and have a look at this, taking this kind of what works approach to our thinking and our evidence work, and taking a multidisciplinary approach to our work as well. So how can we also shift that research approach and that kind of evidence approach from a non-Western understanding of heritage as well? So there's kind of a number of things within that to unpick, that multidisciplinary approach, that shift to kind of the global South kind of thinking around research and heritage, and also how we can break down silos to our learning and our evidence base and bring that all together.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan. And maybe I start with a question for you. So what do you suggest as better way of, because you have mentioning a lot the word work work that you are doing at the British Council. So I think one of the key issues we need to continue to explore in order to move forward is to better evaluate the impacts that cultural heritage can actually generate in order to foster sustainable development and achieve the sustainable development goals, maybe going beyond, and actually really going beyond the current evaluation frameworks, which is part of the SDGs. What do you think is important to consider when evaluating these impacts?
So taking a long-term approach to evaluation, there are quite a lot of the impacts and outcomes we're looking for in our work do happen in the medium to long term. So taking a mixed methods approach, not just relying on numbers, but looking at breadth, depth, multidisciplinary methods. So it's a real long-term multiple approach that we kind of take. So multiple viewpoints, multiple perspectives, and a mixture of tools. Because of the kind of multifaceted nature of cultural heritage, no one kind of standard approach kind of fits. So you have to be kind of, if we take, for example, our Cultural Heritage for Inclusive Growth program, it's taking an action research program. So it's taking that as a method, as a way to learn, to evaluate, and to design a program. So it's kind of being very inquisitive, very curious in the way that we develop our thinking and our methods, and also looking at evaluation approaches that don't just come from the global north, but also come from the global south, and looking at research methods that aren't from a kind of UK, US, European perspective. What are other research methods, creative methods, that we can have a look at as well within our evaluation and research methods.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jan. And Harry, would you like to add anything to this conversation?
Yeah, just a few points, really. I mean, I'm really very happy to hear some of the mention there about rights-based approaches, because I think it's super, super important, because we can't be thinking of a cultural sector that produces things that people then en bloc somehow consume. That's the opposite of a rights-based approach. People have the right to development, to active, free and meaningful participation. The right to participate in cultural life is different it's differently worded than if there was a right to access cultural activities. Like, everyone has these rights, and we should talk about them more. And so I think to hear some of the discussion that there was earlier from Lord Mendoza, like, I understand economists need to put values on things. It's extremely hard to look at how everything can be reduced to an economic value, or whether it should be. If we look at sustainability, is about considering all people, planet, and prosperity as equally important, not trying to convert everything into one value. And I think that just a few points I would make there would be that really that we need to look at sustainable development as being just needs to be part of the way of thinking and planning and doing and communicating and everything. Otherwise, the world will just continue as it is. And I would say that any discussion of sustainability absolutely has to consider all three of people, planet, and prosperity. There's still so much anecdotal, this does this, and this covers SDG 8.9, and this does 9.1. The agenda isn't supposed to be used like that. It's supposed to be a holistic agenda. But then one of the things that the cultural sector can really help play a lead in is, well, how do we help shape these non-economic values of human progress, social progress, but also how do we bring, the communities whose culture and heritage it is that we work with and, are supposed to facilitate. So that's my pitch, really, is for please a much more holistic approach.
I think we still have a lot of work to do in order to really providing a holistic approach. Even all this positive experience that we are mentioning here in our panel today, but also through the chat, I'm seeing that many people are also sharing their work on this topic. I hope we can all make step by step a contribution toward that. But it's true that there is still a lot of work to do on this. Any other thoughts, Jordi, Gabriel?
Thank you, Francesca. Let me address this question on the gaps. But firstly, let me also be clear that we in UCLG are fully committed to the achievement of the SDGs. We wrote a guide in 2018. This guide, we have an online database with more than 230 good practices, all of them indexed according to the SDGs, and we have a to municipalities wishing to achieve the SDGs with a cultural perspective, the seven keys. And now the gaps. Some of them are taken from our report in 2019. Some of them are new. But first, clearer language. We need to reach all. Our language is still difficult. We have to use the language of people. And second, clarify concepts. We have to be bolder on that, especially those that related to identity. We cannot avoid this struggle. Third, better dissemination of the already existing evidence on the place of culture in sustainable development. Solid evidences already exist, and we need to use our quantitative and qualitative indicators to make unavoidable a stronger place for culture in the next global agenda. Fourth, insist to national development agencies planning that are in charge of planning the implementation of the SDGs that they cannot ignore the cultural actors. We have to be fully involved in these processes of planning and also in the processes of writing, reporting what nations are doing in the delivery of the SDGs in the high-level political forum process. Also explore at a global level the formation of a major group for culture, aligned with the requisites of the UN system for major groups. Mondia Cult Plus 40 next year, 2022 in Mexico City. 40 years after the very important Mexico City Declaration in 1982, all right, the global community and culture will meet again. What do we want in Mondia Cult Plus 40 to happen? We would like to promote cultural rights for all, to adopt the narrative of culture as a fourth or the fifth, but a strong dimension of development, equally important to the social, the environmental, and the economic one, and also the beginning of an advocacy for a culture goal in the post-2030 agenda. Our responsibility, make the Culture 2030 goal campaign wider, bigger, and more effective. And yes, also our responsibility, all cultural sectors, all cultural actors, to strengthen efforts towards the implementation of the SDGs. Cultural policies, institutions, and organizations need to contribute more clearly to the challenges we have as one humanity, and we have to be bolder and more explicit in addressing issues such as human rights, gender equality, the fight against all inequalities, and the struggle against climate change. We are not delivering enough here. So these are the gaps that we would like to highlight today.
Thank you, Jordi. And I would like to add one point to the list that you put together, which is, as heritage professionals, academics, or policymakers, I think one thing we should be really aware of is also what are the barriers of using heritage for achieving the SDGs, because sometimes heritage is also a barrier to achieve gender equality, human rights, it divides populations, it can cause conflict as well. So we should be also self-reflective in this regards. And so this is something I would like to point out. So in the meanwhile, I'm happy to tell you that Stuart and Helen joined us for the final round of this roundtable. They were able to manage better than me the questions that were arriving in the chat box. So this is why you can see them here. And maybe Gabriel, you wanted to say something before.
Yes. Yeah, actually, I wanted to reiterate what you said earlier, and also I saw Cornelius's comments, but I'll go through that. And you were asking about the gaps of knowledge, right? For me, I think that we need to diversify the perspective of heritage. We have a lot of these narratives that are the mainstream narratives that maybe we can have the histories and herstories, perspectives from a female perspective of heritage, reflections of indigenous communities to mainstream heritage. And we've always forgotten with these conversations, the LGBTQ spaces and heritage. stone wall is there, and seems that there's no one who's thinking about that as a heritage place where real things have happened. We need to make heritage as a place where polarized societies can use heritage to heal and find a meeting ground. I think that's a research. These are research that can move across. I've mentioned earlier about the International Day of Monuments and Sites that we have, and really these are the topics that we want to identify: diversifying heritage and creating new avenues for new discourse. The other one on what Cornelius and Francesca, you mentioned about there's this relationship and tension of sustainable development industry or sustainable development in heritage sites. Sometimes heritage is seen as a stopper of development, or what is let's say sustainable energy production in heritage sites. There's a lot of conflicts on impacts of wind energy versus visceral impact to heritage values. And we need to go and discuss how the different priorities of the SDGs damage or complement the heritage values, or in the case of World Heritage, that sounding universal value, right? We also need to start thinking about the rapid digital transformation on heritage sites. I know that we've had a conversation earlier about some parts of the world do not have that digital transformation, but we also know that we are changing our practices now. Before, Zoom was not a means of communicating as a conference, but we're changing that kind of lifestyle, and how this affects our own practice. This affects the heritage sites, the conference places that we often go to, that we bring money to in terms of tourism and all is changing, right? We are doing a lot more local and regional travel, and that is affecting this later on after COVID. Does it change? Will we still do much more local travel, or will we go back to that kind of system of rapid travel for different places? How can heritage sites be more prepared for risks of global disruptors? We have COVID now, but in the future, would heritage sites be more prepared for other kinds of events like this? And how do people or places become more resilient? I think these are questions that the Agenda 2030 really did not capture, but I hope that we can have conversations about that. I have two more points, and one is about young people's role in heritage practice and creating a strong institution. This pandemic has provided us an opportunity for a lot of young people, for emerging professionals of ICOMOS and emerging professionals out there to contribute to the discourse on heritage, because a lot of people, younger people, are digital natives, that's what they call it, right? The future that we want is a question that needs to be asked to the younger people as well. We are creating new ways of engaging. How does the heritage practice change with this new, with the digital transformations that are happening? We also need to think about intergenerational learning, right? Heritage that is not just from one perspective, or we need to learn from each other on how the heritage practice can change, new ways of learning, new ways of partnership for sustainable development. These are important questions. And I think last one, Ege has sent out a question related to non-heritage partners, right? I think it is quite important for us to look at identifying these people that are non-heritage partners. How do we get out of the heritage circle, create meaningful connections to protecting heritage that is beyond the silos that we've created for the last several decades, right? How do we find the non-typical collaborators? I just wanted to end my intervention with a colleague. I have a colleague in ICOMOS Philippines, and she has been a cultural heritage worker. But during the pandemic, what she did was that she got engaged with a rural heritage or agricultural site, and she became the middleman, or she's the middle woman who put the agricultural products to the city. And because of her connections to various people in the city, then she created a new kind of industry for those people who were affected by the pandemic. And it has created a sort of heritage protection. Intangible heritage is being protected. She became she is creating, like, let's say, continuing that role of agricultural heritage, but at the same time, she has become part of essential services. Food is part of essential services. So how does heritage become part of the essential services for people? Questions to ask for the future. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Francesca, shall I come in with the...
Yes, please, Stuart.
Francesca, you did an absolutely fantastic job in collating questions and passing them on. But Helen and I will take over to give you a few moments of relief, if that's okay. There are so many absolutely amazing questions in the chat bar. There are 240 plus people in the call. I think there are 240 fantastic questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw 3 or 4 of those questions at you all and ask each of you to maybe just choose one of them and answer one of them. So just kind of off the top of my head, really good question around climate change and cultural heritage, which has been partially answered. But could we have more concrete examples of how those two things coexist? Really good question about the value of citizen action. So how do you engage real people in this process? Fantastic question about how to raise the profile of cultural heritage with governments. Another really provocative question about, is cultural heritage quite often a liability rather than a positive? And then finally, my very favorite question from a Kenyan colleague. So I'm going to read it in the voice of the colleague. Can I ask a question too about Indigenous communities, especially African ones? Are they considered heritage issues, most especially on maintaining their cultural practices that are important to them and not necessarily conventional? And this is a colleague from a pastoralist background. So I've just thrown out a whole bunch of questions. And if each of you would like to choose one just to respond to really quickly, we've about 10 minutes left of the session, so we're trying to race through.
Can I take the one about
Henry, yeah.
Climate change? And I'll roll in with Cornelius's question as well, is that, I mean, as I understand it, heritage and waste are the same thing, thought about differently. They're both things that we pass on to the future. And if we think that, look at, as I mentioned, looking back before the COVID time, the world as it was is an expression of our culture. Like, climate change is an expression of a particular culture and a particular relationship with nature. If we want to do something about climate change, you change the culture that causes it, and that is a mammoth task, mammoth. And that links again with what I was talking there about how can we get to thinking about SDG 17.19? How do we shape and talk about non-economic measures of human progress are crucially important. So that's how I would put those things together. So thank you.
The question you mentioned, Francesca, but also at least 2 of the questions from the chat address the issue of the obstacles, identifying the obstacles from a human rights-based approach to development. This is compulsory. And cultural policies, not only in heritage, but in general, have ignored identifying the obstacles of people to participate in cultural life, of course, respecting the interdependence and the interrelation between this right and the rest of 29 universal human rights, which include right to self-expression, and of course are based in the dignity of all humans. So this approach, a human rights-based approach to development, will have to address the fact that, yes, some heritage practices prevent the exercise of cultural rights by some members of some societies. And we have to be bold on that. Otherwise, we will be trapped in the same situation where we are now. Thank you.
So just to pick up the one on governments, So we work with governments all around the world, particularly on heritage. We've got a number of our heritage programs, as well as the UK government and the devolved administrations here in the UK as well, and also international organisations like the EU Commission. So what we're finding is, if sharing evidence, sharing learning of kind of what works and what doesn't work, but also in a language that's appropriate to each of those governments as well, and how it aligns to what they're looking for. So we've been using our global network to get that intelligence of what governments are after, what language they're after, what evidence they're after, and then how we bring that to the table from across our programs and beyond our programs, and put that in front of governments, policymakers, to inform government decisions and influence government decisions across the globe.
For me, I just wanted to add into what Jordi said about the work of heritage and in terms of mediating rights. I think we have this. We are in a very important point wherein we can decide which type of heritage do we keep, or do we advocate and to acknowledge, right? So the role of heritage in creating narratives and creating the mainstream perspectives on heritage and who is left out is something that we also always have to be careful with. The idea that there are always people that are left behind is, and the idea of SDGs is that no one is left behind. I think we have to be there to really think about it and say that, hey, we need to show that more successfully, more gently, so that a lot of people's voices are heard. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. It's a very, very important question that we all have to face.
A fascinating discussion, and huge thanks to all the panelists. And what I'm hearing is a number of areas of conflict, not between our specialists, but conflict in areas of heritage and so on and so forth emerging. And it seems to me that we have not just enough questions for another conference, but enough for several follow-up conferences if we can ever find the energy. And I think that what I'm hearing is that there's always a risk that we preach to the converted. We talk to the people who, if they don't share our point of view, at least perhaps recognize our point of view. And the challenge for us, perhaps as we move forward from this conference, is to find a way to seek out and engage those who either disregard us because they think we're irrelevant, or they disagree with us on priorities, or they dislike what we stand for. And I think that we need to have discussions with those interlocutors if we're going to make real headway on some of the things we're trying to achieve. That could be terrific fun, I think, to have a conference with people who wildly disagree with some of our received wisdom, or even with some of the slightly more fringe ideas that we're currently developing. So I think I'm in a good position because I'm just coming to the end of my term at the UK National Commission for UNESCO. So I'm going to throw down the gauntlet to those who come afterwards to engage with the disagreeers. And I'd be interested to know what the panelists think of that suggestion.
To be honest, the thing that should be just completely not up for negotiation is that people have rights, but almost no one talks about them. And so if no one talks about them, it's not really a great mystery when we see them, eroded, abused, forgotten left, right, and centre. So I think, of course, there are different perspectives, and that is a good thing, because if we all thought the same thing, life would be extremely boring. But I think the more that we can acknowledge that everyone has rights, these are, it's not my place to take someone else's rights away from them. But we should be using them as a basis for what we do. Surely that should be a bottom line, I think.
What about when one right conflicts with another?
So, well, because of course, rights are not absolute things either. And they're not just about one person's entitlement to do what they want. They're also about how people coexist with one another, and they accept and tolerate difference. And they negotiate that difference together. That's one of the things that a cultural sector is just so well placed to do, is not to project its view of the world onto society, but to help bring society together. This is so important. We see, growing inequality left, right, and centre. We see tensions. Rather than shy away from the tensions, we should be using, working to bring people who have different views together. Otherwise, the world's, fractured.
It looks like Gabe is trying to come in for what I think may have to be the last intervention before I ask either Stuart or Francesca, I'm not quite sure which, to make a wrap-up sentence. So let's just hear Gabe very quickly, if you could, and then we'll pass over to Francesca.
I think I just wanted to say that I agree with Henry that this idea of diversity in our work, and then it doesn't need to be that we all agree on all things, right? That's what makes cultural diversity work, right? We don't need to have a globalized perspective on things, but to realize that we are all in different parts. We are doing collaboratively one component of the SDGs, or maybe all of it, but to recognize that each person is a player that can spread the news of the SDGs and heritage. I think that's fine.
I win the amazing job to close this session. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, our keynote speakers. Thank you very much, our brilliant panelists, for the roundtable, for the very useful insights you were able to bring into the conversation. So as Helen said, we can build one or more conference to discuss all these issues, but hopefully I'm very happy to say that the conference doesn't end today. So we still have other 12 sessions ahead. So discussing all these points from the 11 thematic point of view. So we will be focusing on biocultural heritage and linking nature and culture tomorrow morning. Then we will talk about disaster response and resilience tomorrow afternoon. And then all over this week and the beginning of the next one, we will also explore how heritage can contribute to mental health and well-being, how can it contribute to sustainable inclusive cities. So in that occasion, for example, we can absolutely talk about how different interests can be can or could be well managed in the urban management systems. For example, we have a couple of sessions on people-centered approaches, just focusing on there, and on decolonizing approaches. So again, we will continue the conversation immersed today about the need to really promote people-centered approaches and leaving no one behind, not only in the sustainable development framework, but also in our more closer heritage work, and how we can, preserve and manage different kind of heritage, and which heritage we are able to select and protect and preserve in a way that it can really can be really recognized by each community and communities, because we should also talk about communities and not only communities, because they are different. Then we have also sessions about, let me think, the role of the digital technologies that can have in this context, and how we can think of using tourism and the creative industries beyond economic development. So looking at the all dimensions of sustainable development, so also including the environmental and the social one, and of course the cultural one. And the last day of this conference, we will be exploring other ways of measuring the impact of heritage for the SDGs. So we will have the chance to continue the conversation, particularly as mentioned by Jan, on the different mixed methods for evaluating this impact. And in the last session of this conference, we will summarize all the key inputs emerged all over this 10 days of conference, and which will be then used to prepare another publications or another conference outputs, presenting a future research agenda, action plans, and also 1 or 2 pages policy briefs to be shared with relevant policy makers in the field. So I invite you all to join us for the rest of the sessions, for the rest of the conference, so from tomorrow until the end, which is on next Tuesday, the 2nd of March, and to really contribute with all the inputs you can have to continue these amazing conversations and the brilliant discussion we had today. So Thank you very much, everybody. It was a pleasure to hear your contributions today. And please join us for the rest of the conference. Thank you, everybody.